You weren't the problem, you were the evidence. So they did what a lot of families do. They made the evidence look crazy. Here's what you were never meant to see: why they chose you, how they kept you in that role, and what starts to change when you finally stop carrying it for them. When everyone you love keeps treating you like you're the common denominator, eventually you stop fighting it. You think, if they all say I'm the problem, then I must be. Here's the part they never wanted you to notice. Your family didn't need you to be healthy. They needed you to be believable as the problem, the designated problem child. Because if you weren't the problem, they'd have to look at themselves. And they were never going to do that. They chose you for a reason. Not because you were weak, but because you were the one who noticed things. You saw the mood shifts, the contradictions, the things no one else wanted to talk about. You felt what other people pretended not to feel. You asked questions the family needed left unanswered. That made you inconvenient. In a system built on denial, the child who sees clearly becomes the threat. And once they decide you're the threat, they start rewriting every moment of your life to fit that story. In a healthy family, when tension shows up, people ask, what's happening with us? What's going on here? In your family, tension showed up and the question was, what have they done now? The story was written before you were even old enough to spell your own name. They didn't get to know you. They cast you in a role. You were difficult, ungrateful, too sensitive, always starting drama. In other words, the one who rocked the boat. Not because you were a defective child, because someone had to carry the weight of everything they refused to see in themselves. Your anger at real injustice became your anger issues. Your sadness about actual neglect became attention seeking. Your refusal to lie became disrespect. Your reactions were never the problem. They were evidence of the problem. So your reactions had to become the story instead. You became the punching bag that made everyone else look fine. And without realizing it, you absorbed their script. It became an internal voice that sounded like you, but was never yours. Stay small. Don't need anything. Fix it first. Something is wrong with me. That voice is the residue of being raised as the family explanation, rather than the family member. And that's the point. You were never meant to make sense as a person. You are only meant to make the system make sense. Scapegoating isn't random, it's a workaround. Your family had issues long before you ever spoke, cried, or slammed a door. Addiction, control, violence, neglect, affairs, chronic lying, emotional absence. Whichever combination fits your household. To admit that out loud would mean saying things like, we hurt our kids, we weren't safe, we're not who we pretend to be. For some people, being that honest would break the way they see themselves. So instead of changing, they looked for somewhere to dump the guilt. They took what they didn't want to feel and stuck it onto you. Their laziness became your laziness. Their anger became your temper. Their selfishness became your character flaw. It was easier to blame you than hold themselves accountable. They offloaded their shame into you, then punished you for being so shameful. You weren't the messy one. You were where the mess was stored. Your suffering kept the system stable. Your pain protected the family myth. Your silence protected their image. A broken scapegoat keeps the whole house balanced on the lie. The only problem is, kids grow up. And once you start seeing the lie, they have to work even harder to keep you in your place. You can't just tell the world, this child is the problem, and hope everyone believes it. You have to rig the environment, so they keep proving you right. So the rules were different for you. You were punished faster, blamed first, believed last, if at all. Another kid forgot a chore, and it was kids being kids. You forgot a chore, and it was you never help, you never think of anyone but yourself. Another kid slammed a door, and it was teenagers. You slammed a door, and suddenly it was proof you are unhinged. They created situations where anyone would eventually crack, then held up your crack as evidence that you were broken. They ignored you until you lost it. Then the story became, see, this is what we're talking about. You always overreact. They poked the bruise, then acted shocked when you flinched. At family gatherings, they told stories about you that everyone thought were hilarious. They weren't jokes. They were humiliation dressed up as humour. Their part was always edited out. You were the punchline. They were the good parents coping with the wild child. They weren't just managing you, they were managing the room, making sure everyone knew who the problem was, so no one ever turned around and asked, where did they learn this behaviour? Your siblings worked it out quickly. Side with the story, stay safe. Question the story, risk becoming you. None of this was accidental. Families like this run on rules no one says out loud. Rules like don't challenge the parent's version of reality, don't have needs, don't express emotion, don't expose anything outside the house. And above all, never threaten the family story. Break any of those rules and the punishment was immediate. So what do you think happens to the one kid who insists on telling the truth about what's actually going on? Think about the times you tried to explain what was actually happening. You said, he did this. She said that. This is what happened. Watch what happened to the conversation. It wasn't about their behaviour for long. Suddenly, it was all about your tone, your attitude, your timing, your disrespect. You thought you were bringing information. They experienced it as a threat. Because if your version of events is accurate, theirs isn't. And their version isn't just a different opinion, it's their alibi. So instead of asking whether what you were saying was true, they attacked your credibility. You twist things, you're dramatic, you make things up, you're sick, you need help. They didn't just disagree, they went after your sanity and your character. That was never a coincidence. Truth tellers are the first target in any dysfunctional system. Not because they lie, but because they don't. And nothing exposes the truth faster than the scapegoat finally understanding what was done to them. Fast forward, you get older. You stumble onto words like trauma, scapegoating, emotional abuse. You start connecting dots you didn't have the language for. You stop automatically apologising for existing. You stop explaining every choice you make. You set basic boundaries. You start asking for the kind of respect they never had to give you before. Watch what happens. Suddenly, you're selfish, cold, cruel for bringing up old stuff, ungrateful after everything we did for you. They'll say anything except the obvious thing, which is we treated you badly and you finally noticed. Your healing threatens the family story. A scapegoat who stays confused keeps the system stable. A scapegoat who can say, no, that was abuse, is a liability. So your growth gets framed as mental illness or manipulation. Your boundaries get labelled as cruelty. Your distance gets labelled as betrayal. Because if your reaction is legitimate, their behaviour wasn't. Here's the part that hits hard because it's true. They were more comfortable with you broken than with you healthy. They were fine with the version of you who was anxious and apologising. They're not fine with the version of you who sees the pattern and refuses to play. They were perfectly capable of parenting a problem child. They have no idea what to do with an adult who can look them in the eye and say, no, that's not what happened. So they keep trying to drag you back into the same old role. Back to defending yourself. Back to explaining things they already understand. Because if they let your clarity stand, they lose their excuse. You're probably not going to get a neat confession. At best, you get a half admission, soaked in self-pity. At worst, you get nothing. You being the scapegoat was never proof that you were defective. It was proof that they couldn't face themselves. Healthy families mess up, then repair. They listen when you say you're hurt. They apologise, they adjust. They don't need a permanent villain to feel good about who they are. Your family did. So they used you. They used your sensitivity, your honesty, your intensity, your refusal to disappear. They took the parts of you that reacted to bullshit and treated those parts as the flaw. Not because those traits were bad, because those traits made you harder to control. And the body pays for that. Hypervigilance, people-pleasing, shame that sits in your chest like a stone, flashbacks with no images, only feelings, a nervous system trained to expect attack. None of that came from who you are. It came from who you had to be to survive the role. You weren't made the scapegoat because you were the weakest link. You were made the scapegoat because you were the most inconvenient. You felt things, you saw things. You didn't collapse into the story cleanly. In a healthy family, that would have been feedback. In yours, it was a threat. So they turned you into the problem because it was easier to attack your reality than rewrite their own. That's the logic. Cold, simple, ugly. You're not here to keep holding it for them. You don't have to keep proving you're not what they called you. You don't have to keep explaining the same history to people who lived it. They heard you. They just prefer the version where you're the problem. You don't have to keep standing in the firing line so no one else has to feel a shred of guilt. You're allowed to say, I wasn't born the problem, I was assigned. And you're allowed to resign. You don't have to burn so everyone else can stay warm. You're allowed to step out of the role, let their story collapse if it needs to, and build a life that doesn't require a villain to function. If that makes you the bad guy in their story, fine. They were never seeing you anyway. If this hit you harder than you expected, it's because you were never the problem. You were trained to carry it. If you want to see the exact rules your family ran on, I've put the 10 scapegoat rules into a free guide so you can map how they still show up in your life now. The link's in the description box below. And if you want to stick around a bit longer, watch the next video. It'll help you see how keeping the peace cost you your self-respect.